Cats fans want. Noel hits one high to left field. That's a no-doubter for Noel.
One pitch. High drive to right. Well stocked. That ball is going. That ball is gone. It's a 3-2 ball game. A 2-run home run for George Galera. The ball gets high. Deep down the left field line. Beltray going back and that's the ball is gone. We're tied at 4 on the bottom of the 8th.
In the air to right field, hit pretty high, hit pretty deep. That ball is gone! Ryan Lavastida with a walk-off home run.
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Future Guardians of the Land podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Sleds. With me this week, I have the co-host of the Guardians of the CLE podcast here on Believe Land Media LLC. She is Melanie Kirby. How you doing, Mel?
Not too bad. How's it going, Kevin?
It's going pretty good. So we're into the ending parts of spring training, getting close to the season starting, and a lot of the younger prospects have been making an impression.
They've really highlighted the spring.
Yes, they have. None other than Gabriel Arias, who's so far 7 for 11 on the spring. I know he's been playing a lot of shortstop. He's a guy that skipped Double A, went up to Triple A last year, handled himself well, hit 284, and a guy who's making a name for himself and putting his name in a hat either at second base or shortstop.
Yeah, I feel like at this point the team's kind of wanting him to force his way onto that opening day roster, and he's doing exactly that. We know that, Rocchio's probably, the future shortstop, so that might make them a little more aggressive with Gabriel Arias. They're going to take their time with Rocchio, but I think Arias is a guy they're going to want to see at the major league level. And I mean, with the way he's performing, I don't really see how you keep him off the roster at this point. What else can you ask the kid to do?
Exactly. And I think he is forcing his way on, and we'll see how that goes.
That's 2 springs in a row now.
Yeah, it is.
He did the same thing last spring.
Yes, he did. Another guy that's kind of been forgotten about is Oscar Gonzalez. He kind of got off to a hot start this spring, but has cooled off recently. He's 5 for 14, a couple doubles, a home run, and 6 runs batted in. I know Tito had some good things to say about him, but he's a guy that they obviously left off the 40-man roster, but they were able to bring back on a minor league deal. So I think he's more of a long shot at this point, but you can't doubt the power that he has from the right side of the plate.
Yeah, he's probably a long shot just based on the roster situation. He won't walk. He's not a great defender, but that power can't be ignored. And honestly, when we're talking about the outfield, if you told me you were trying out for a spot in right field, I would say you should probably make it over Bradley Zimmer. So I'm just preparing myself for this awful scenario where Bradley Zimmer somehow makes this 40-man roster. When they say they want the kids to play, but at this point, it's like Zimmer and even Mercado, to an extent, are taking at-bats away from Kwan, Palacios, and even Oscar Gonzalez at this point.
Right.
If you DFA Zimmer, there's Gonzalez's spot right there.
Exactly.
I don't know how much more time they need on that, but he's bringing you nothing at this point. He's so lost at the plate that I don't know how you salvage that right now.
Yeah, he's on a nice strikeout binge this spring.
Like you have to try to be that bad.
Yeah.
It's bad.
You mentioned Steven Kwan. He's 5 for 13, a couple runs batted in. He's another guy, obviously, that has a shot to start in right field this year, along with Richie Palacios. I think Kwan has a little bit of an edge over Richie. Richie's 3 for 10 this spring, but I think Kwan has a little bit of an advantage there. Of course, you could see Palacios make it as a fourth outfielder, so that's a possibility. He was a super utility guy because he can play the infield as well, second base, shortstop.
Yeah, at this point, just with the numbers so far, I definitely think Kwan's in that outfield somewhere. It still remains to be seen what they're going to do in left field. We keep hearing all this talk that Rosario might get at bats out there, but we're really not seeing him out there, all like that. But, Kwan's able to play those 3 spots out there. But I do wonder how they value Richie with the ability to play both the infield and the outfield. They kind of value guys like that who can play all over the place. It's like they're getting more bang for their buck in that roster spot.
Right. And then there's been some other young guys who don't really have a shot at making it right now. Jose Tena, PD Halpin, George Valera, Roquio, you mentioned, John Kensey Noel, Brian Lavastida, Bo Naylor, all have gotten some at-bats, a little bit of experience. So those are guys more for 2023 and beyond.
I wonder what they're going to do at catcher now with Maley out 3 to 4 weeks with that hamstring injury. So you got Austin Hedges, then Sandy Leon's only on a minor league deal. He'd have to be added to the 40, so they'd have to take someone off that 40-man roster, but Lavastida's already on the 40-man roster, so I wonder how they're going to play that.
Yeah, I think they're probably going to add Sandy Leon, which will give us the probably the worst offensive catching tandem in the history of Major League Baseball. But
oh, good. And then they didn't upgrade any of the other spots, so
right,
that offense is looking like it's loaded with firepower for 2023.
Oh yeah.
And that's another thing, like just with the head scratching. So, they're in on Olsen and Winker, then obviously they backed out for different reasons, which I understand, but where's plan C and plan D? It's like you showed you were kind of willing to spend a little bit of money on those two guys. Then you go back to, we don't want to sign anybody who's going to block the kids from playing.
Right.
Well, Zimmer and Mercado are still playing. Hedges and Leon are at catcher. So it's like you signed Brian Shaw to a contract that can go up to $9 million in escalators when you could have signed, Ryan Tepera, Andrew Chafin, or let some of these kids in the bullpen. Like Eniel De Los Santos looks pretty good this spring too. Speaking of the kids who are kind of performing at a high level. So it's like what they're saying just isn't really matching what they're doing. Because if you wanted the kids to play, Rosario would not be at shortstop. Zimmer and Mercado would not be, competing for right field when neither of them should have that spot. It should be guys like Kwan and Palacios and Oscar Gonzalez. So it's just interesting that they have this mindset, which I believe they do have. They've always kind of had this mindset. It's a way for them to kind of retool and be competitive long-term and not per se have this championship window. But I don't see how guys like Zimmer, Mercado, and Leon are, that matches letting the kids play.
Right. And going along with what you said, I did hear about Mike Chernoff. Somebody brought up the idea of signing Michael Conforto, and he mentioned that, they're not looking to bring in a veteran right now who's going to take at bats away from the young guys. So that makes you think that, okay, are they going to go with a couple of these young guys? And then I read an article this morning from Terry Pluto said pretty much the same thing. All the front office people he talked to within the organization said the same thing, that it's time to look at some of these young guys and see what they have. So that gives me hope that maybe we won't see a Mercado and a Zimmer out there.
Yeah, and to me, it would have been, they could have kind of salvaged the offseason if they could have signed Conforto to like a 1 or 2 year deal. Because with him still out on the market, it's like, is he waiting for that qualifying offer to expire? Or is he, kind of giving up on the idea of a long-term deal and might go for, a 1 or 2 year prove-it deal, which I think would be fine because then he'd kind of be a stopgap to George Valera. But I saw those same comments, and it doesn't look like that's something that interests them. So it's like, once again, I'm all for letting the kids play. When you added this many guys to the 40-man roster and didn't have a Rule 5 draft, now you're kind of, crap, what do we do with these guys? We kind of, at some point, we have to see who's worth keeping and who's worth trading, because their fear probably is, well, what if Jose Tena is the next star? And we we got to, at some point give these guys a look. But, when it comes to all these middle infielders, it's like Arias might have an even better shot at making this opening day roster, because you can't keep Brian Roquio at AA forever. He's probably, ready for AAA. And then you have Arias blocking him at AAA, all because Ahmed Rosario is still playing shortstop for us. So
Right.
It's like some of these things they're going to have to kind of figure out on the field. But then it's like, this is a team that we don't really see some of these prospects until at least May. They ran Ben Gamble out there last year until like the end of May, which was so hard to watch. And that's what scares me, that Zimmer and Mercado is going to be the same deal.
Yeah, it's that whole service time manipulation that they like to do, unfortunately. And
Exactly.
yeah, that scares me too, that we may see the same situation. So we talked about it a little bit, which prospects may have a legit shot to make the opening day roster. I think right field is definitely a gaping hole. We mentioned Zimmer with it's not making contact this spring. He's now 29 years old. He's definitely way out of the prospect area. Yeah. So we mentioned Oscar Gonzalez, more of a long shot at this point. Got off to a hot start, hit 31 home runs in 121 games. It's that power that's intriguing, but like you said, he has trouble with the off-speed pitches, and his defense in the outfield is not up to par at this point.
Yeah, and I say it on, our podcast with Max all the time. There should never be a situation where Miles Straw is your best outfielder. If we look at a team who makes the playoffs consistently, like the Houston Astros, he was a fourth outfielder. And I'm not saying he can't start every day in center field, but he can't be your best guy out there. You got to have some offense in those corner spots around him. And that's why, when we headed into this offseason, I didn't see a scenario where they didn't upgrade at least one of those left or right, one of those corners. I didn't even prepare myself for the idea that not one of those would be upgraded, because even the front office said we need to get more offense.
Right.
So that's what makes me think. I think, I'm fine with seeing a guy like Stephen Kwan. That excites me because he's an actual prospect. But like, the fact they're not even willing to upgrade right field is definitely a head scratcher. And, at this point, throw Oscar Gonzalez out there. Who cares? You re-sign him to a minor league deal, you might as well see what he has. But like you said, that's definitely a long shot just because of how this organization operates.
I had to laugh during the one spring game at Underwood when Gonzalez was up at the plate. Said, the organization is really high on this guy.
Yeah.
Okay, if that's the case, then why did they leave him off the 40 man?
I remember a game last year where Rick Manning thought Ahmed Rosario was our shortstop of the future. He had no idea any of the guys' names at the middle infield spots. And it's that bad this spring that they're actually calling for the kids to play.
Right.
And for Underwood and Manning to be calling for the kids to play when they don't even know anything about these kids, that tells you how bad, some of these guys we're used to seeing on the Major League roster have been.
So you talk about Stephen Kwan, and he's actually my favorite to win the right field job. Career 301 hitter in the minors. Last 2 seasons, full years in the minor leagues, he struck out 82 times and 883 at bats. I mean, that's incredible.
They love that type of hitter too.
Yep. And he showed a little bit more pop last year too. So, I mean, he's not a guy that's going to hit 20 plus home runs, but he can probably get you 12 to 15 home runs a year. I think he's going to be a pretty solid hitter, not all-star type, but just a solid major league ball player.
I agree. And I think that increase in power is just kind of like the gift of just having a really good swing. It's not like he did anything different to his swing to get that power. That was just kind of like, here's your reward for, having a really good swing. How does his arm play out in right field? He normally plays over on the left side so far in the minors, right?
Right. Yeah, that'll be interesting. He doesn't have a great arm. It's about average, but yeah, it'd be interesting to see how that would play out switching over to right field.
Yeah, I know they value Zimmer's defense, unfortunately, but it's like when you're that lost at the plate, it's like, what value do you even bring in a late game defensive replacement pinch runner role when you might have a crucial at bat in, 8th, 9th, or extra innings? Like, do you trust him to go up and hit with a ghost runner on second in extra innings? I don't.
No, I don't either.
Not at this point.
And I get loving the defense of a lot of these guys, but I mean, you need offense from somewhere. I mean, you can't just put a bunch of defensive guys out there and hope to win and waste this pitching staff like they did last year.
Yeah.
And we talk about Gabriel Arias. He's a guy that I'm actually absolutely in love with. We talked about him playing short. If Rosario moves to left, it's a little concerning that Rosario, as you said, hasn't played much left field this spring. He can also play second base if they do keep Rosario at short. So hit 284, as I said, in his first full season at AAA last year. He got some pop, hit 13 home runs. Just turned 22 last month. I know he's young, but he looks like a guy who's ready to compete at the major league level.
Yeah, I think the best lineup they can put out on the field is going to be some combination of Jimenez and Arias up the middle.
Yeah.
Wherever it would probably be Jimenez at short and Arias at second, which is kind of a waste of his arm, which would kind of suck. But in a short-term role, I would be fine with that. It's just getting both of those guys, your future, up the middle. It's like what they're doing with Rosario and just talking about moving him out to left field. It's almost similar to what they did with Nolan Jones at AAA last year. You know, they're like, well, what do? We can't really keep him in third. We have Jose at third. So they're talking about playing him out in right field and even some at first base, but he never really played out there. It's like every time the Clippers ran out there, he's at third base. So it was like, are they trying to trade this guy and keep him at his best position? Or is it him, you know, unwilling to play right or first base? So it's like, it's these head scratching. They say one thing, but then, you know, the lineup cards come out and you're like, well, why is Rosario still at short? Why was Nolan Jones still at third? So I know he's still, you know, coming off that ankle injury. So we don't really have to worry about what they're going to do with him for a couple months at least. But he's another one. It's like there's a couple of these guys who are just kind of blocking the real prospects. And not that Nolan Jones isn't a real prospect, but
Right.
there's so many of them. It's like at some point, you're going to have to find out where to play him. And they could have told Rosario going into the offseason, you know, take reps out in left field. That's going to be your best spot for us. But again, they told him he's the shortstop. So he had a whole offseason. And instead, they're trying to cram it into spring training again, which didn't go well for him last year.
Right. Yeah, they actually just they optioned Jones and Freeman this morning along with Noel. But Freeman's still obviously coming back from the shoulder surgery. And like you said, Jones with the ankle injury.
Mm-hmm.
And then we got Richie Palacios, another guy competing for an outfield spot. Another guy who could possibly play right field, but kind of behind Stephen Kwan, as we mentioned at the moment. And like you said, a guy that's learned the outfield over the last year or so to, you know, give himself a better shot at making it to the major league and being more versatile.
Yeah, I really like Kwan and Palacios. You know, I love his story. I love him as a player. You know, if any of you haven't listened to Kevin's interview with Richie, you should definitely go back and listen to it. That was a great interview. And I just love the comeback story, you know, missing the full year with injury, missing the COVID year. And he just came out and hit last year. And I would love a scenario where he finds his way on this roster as that kind of super utility guy that you talk about. But, you know, then there's Yu Chang who can kind of do the same thing in the infield at least. So,
Right.
you know, how are they going to value that? But at this point, I don't see how Kwan, you know, wouldn't kind of gain that outfield spot. It's just a matter of how much will they play him. Hopefully, if they're going to put him on that roster, he's getting semi-regular at bats.
Right. And in that Terry Pluto article, he said that from info he's gathered, either Kwan or Palacios are definitely going to make the opening day roster.
And that's good to see. At least they're valuing, you know, some of these actual prospects. And I think, and they're typically pretty good if they're bringing a prospect up, they're playing him. You know, when they brought Owen Miller up last year, he was struggling big time, but they kept throwing him out there because that's important for a young guy to get those consistent at bats to kind of get his footing at the major league level, because it's a completely different game. They're not seeing the type of stuff from pitchers in AAA that they're seeing in the major league. So
Right.
I do think that's one thing they do kind of value is if we're going to put this guy on the active roster, you know, we got to get him consistent at bats somewhere.
Right. And there's a pretty big competition right now for the utility spots, depending on what they do. If Chang ends up starting at second base, but you've got Chang, Ernie Clements had a ridiculous spring hitting the ball. And Owen Miller's hitting over 400 this spring. And I mean, there's nothing left for him to prove down in the minor leagues.
Yeah, this is like the most intense battle we got out there in the spring is this utility spot. And you know, I was never big on Yu Chang. I kind of thought he was a really tradable piece in the offseason if they were to make a move, but you can't ignore what he's doing. You know, he had the grand slam the other day. You can't really ignore what he's doing out there. But as you mentioned, I mean, Clement and Miller are doing the exact same thing. So how do you choose these guys? They can't all be on the roster again. They literally do the same thing. They play
Right.
all over the infield. So it's going to be interesting to see who comes out of that. I mean, I don't know what their option situation are. Chang's probably out of options.
Yeah, no, Chang's definitely out of options.
So that might give him the leg up, you
Right.
know, just simply not having any options left. So, but yeah, like you said, I mean, Miller and Clement really don't have anything left to prove. And Clement's defense is outstanding. It's like wherever you throw him, he's making a dazzling play with that glove.
Yes, he is.
That's valuable.
All right, so we talked about our concerns with the lineup. So I put down my prediction.
And it made me want to throw up, Kevin.
And
I want to go play in traffic.
I was thinking in Tito's mind. So what I had is Bobby Bradley at first base, Yu Chang at second, Rosario at shortstop, of course Ramirez at third, Austin Hedges at catcher, an outfield of Mercado, Straw, and Zimmer, which does make me nauseous. And then of
No,
course Fran Mill at DH. Now go ahead and give
Yeah.
your thoughts, and then I'll go over the lineup I'd like to see.
Yeah, like this is a lineup that makes me want to go play in traffic. So obviously Jose at third, that's great. They need to extend him. I really hope they actually are talking to him about that. Obviously Miles Straw in center. That, you know, he'll be in the leadoff spot. Reyes, obviously. And then with first base, I'm kind of almost at the stage where I'm over Bobby Bradley too. I know he's going to get that chance because he's also out of options, but it's going to be really interesting to see how Josh Naylor comes off this injury because he, you know, I know they're trying to play him out and right, but just depending how that leg bounces back, he could be a guy that gets some at bats at first base as well. Second base, you're probably right with Yu Chang. Like I've mentioned, I would really like to see Jimenez or Arias up the middle. Rosario probably will be starting at shortstop, which makes literally no sense when you have two great defenders in Jimenez and Arias. But yeah, you know, you're going to have Hedges catching. I guess at this point, it's just a matter of who's going to be backing him up. And I get the whole Mercado Zimmer and left. There's no way he can actually, like, I'm not prepared for that scenario on April 7th when I see Zimmer and Mercado in that lineup. Like, that will immediately get me so pissed off, like from day one, from the jump of the season. I know they're not like super serious about contending this year, is what it sounds like. It's kind of like we're going to play the kids, and if it's successful, great. You know, we're always consistently competitive, and they're more focused on 2023. But that is such an unserious lineup. Like, that's not scaring anybody. No. That is not like Sonny Gray just went over to Minnesota. He's not scared by this lineup. You know, Eduardo Rodriguez on Detroit, not scared of this lineup. Like anybody who faces this lineup, it's like you're doing Jose Ramirez an absolute disservice with this lineup. You know, if it really gets to the point where, you know, playing the kids isn't going so well, we're not in contention at the deadline and we have to trade Jose Ramirez, like this is an absolute disservice to waste the last little bit of time you have with such an amazing, probably the top third baseman in baseball, and you're going to put this lineup around him. If I were him, I wouldn't even entertain an idea of an extension with this lineup. I'd be like, there's absolutely no way I am signing a 4 or 5 year deal and you're putting this around me.
Right.
Like, show me that you want to be competitive and then we'll talk. Like, show me one thing that makes me think you want to be competitive. And you can't blame him for that. He signed an extremely team-friendly deal with this current deal he's on. Like, he wants to get paid, and I'm sure he wants to win. He had that taste of it in 16. You know, 17 was obviously a disappointment. Like, he's ready to get paid as he should, and he's ready to win. So, you know, and if that means we have to move him at the deadline, like, let's hope they get the right package back in return for him. That's all I can say.
Yeah, I don't even want to think about that at this point, but it is a harsh reality that I'm sure we're going to have to face at some point here soon. So looking at what I would like to see, I agree with you at first base. I'm kind of on the fence with Bradley. This is pretty much his last shot. He's out of options. So I know they're afraid to give up on him too soon. So
it's like Jake Bauer last year.
Exactly.
You know, Bradley got stuck in the minors because Jake Bauers was out of options. So now it's like Bradley's on the Jake Bauers on now. Like, oh, I get the spot because I'm out of options.
Right.
Like,
and yeah, Josh Naylor, you could see. I think I like him a little bit better at first base, especially after the injury. And then you know, Yu Chang and Owen Miller both have learned to play the first base position over the last year or so. So you know, you could see them against some lefties if they're on the roster. Second base, Andres Jimenez, I think, is my favorite there. Yu Chang as the backup. Like you mentioned, I'd like to see the Jimenez Arias up the middle with Arias at shortstop because that's his better position for sure. Jose at third, obviously. By default, Austin Hedges a catcher because there is nobody else right now. Lavastida is not quite ready yet, and you know, Bo Naylor still got some time to develop as well. Left field, I've got Ahmed Rosario, Straw in center, and Kwan in right field, and then Fran Mill at DH. That's
Yeah.
that's how I would do it if I was the manager. But of course,
That's
I'm
their
not.
best lineup. And
Yeah, I think so.
which probably means it won't happen. But that, I mean, with the kids playing and while also wanting to be competitive, I think that lineup gives them their best shot at that. And it's also kind of maximizing everybody, defensively. Like you said, Arias's best position is definitely a shortstop. And like, I mean, half the time Ahmed Rosario played shortstop, he ended up in left field anyways. So he seems like a natural left fielder to me. Like
Right.
I think, I mean, he's not going to be stellar, but I don't think he's really going to kill you out there.
No.
So like, and when you have Strawn center who covers so much ground, and Rosario's fast too, so I think he could play all right in left field. But I don't know. It's like you want the kids to play, but which kids are you going to play?
Yeah, it's tough.
What it boils down to.
It's a good problem to have, though, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So we talked about, I was feeling the same way you were. I thought for sure they would add an outfielder, a starting caliber outfielder, and they didn't. So, I mean, you've got a lot of fans, especially your average fans, who were upset already with the name change and the rebrand. And then you don't go out and spend any money. I mean, it's just a bad look. This was their chance to kind of make it up to the fans, get everybody interested again by and I know, like you said, they tried. We're supposedly in on Matt Olson and Winker, but there were reasons why they didn't make those deals, and pretty understandable. But like you said, there were other guys that they had chances to acquire, even Conforto, who's still out there. And not to say they couldn't still sign him, but it looks unlikely at this point.
Yeah, I really wish that the Dolans in this organization would kind of see that in order to make a lot of money, you got to spend some money, because I think people underestimate how much the common fan, brings to a baseball team. Like the common fan makes up like a ton of tickets sold. And, we may be excited about Brian Rocchio and George Valera and, Daniel Espino and these pitchers we got coming up, but the common fan does not know who these guys are, let alone, Stephen Kwan and Palacios and Jose Tena and all these other young kids that they put on the 40-man roster. Like they're not selling tickets at this point because, that the common fan isn't paying attention to our minor leagues. They show up at the games for guys like Jose and Franmil Reyes and Shane Bieber, guys who are proven. That's why if you really want to be competitive and you really want to make money, which the Dolans seem like they're all about, saving a dollar, but it's like, they spent in 16 and 17 and it paid off, but it's like they had that success. And then every year since then, they reduced payroll. So it's like, you can't have your cake and eat it too. If you really want to sell tickets and you really want to be in contention, like serious contention, you got to spend some money. It's just that simple. Like a Jesse Winker or Matt Olson trade would have excited a lot of people. Like,
Oh, yeah.
Oh, wow, we're ushering the Guardians era in and they're spending money too. And it just makes me wonder what's going on with this David Blitzer minority ownership, because they're out bidding on that Premier League team, as we speak. So it's like, is he doing both, or did something fall through with the Dolans? And it's kind of been silent on that front. We don't really know. But it definitely appears as though they're not having that influx of cash that they thought they'd have.
Yeah, the Blitzer thing does worry me a little bit, because I had heard that it was pretty much a formality and would be announced after the lockout, but we've heard nothing about it.
Nothing.
So, yeah, that concerns me. And maybe that's why they're not spending money, because they're not getting that influx they thought they were going to have from him.
I thought the same thing.
But we talked about Jose possibly being traded at the deadline, or after the season if he doesn't reach an extension. I think it's more likely that he gets moved after the season's over. I think, like you mentioned with Rocchio coming up, I think he'll be ready in 2023 to play short. I think you could see Arias move over to third base. And then second base, you got Jimenez and Tyler Freeman, who's an incredible hitter who obviously missed most of last year with the shoulder injury, had surgery, but he'll probably be either starting at Akron or Columbus this year, but he could possibly be ready by 2023. So many middle infielders, as we've said. That's where we expected them to make an addition, is to trading some of this excess. But I know they're kind of reluctant to give up on prospects, but you got to do it at some point.
Yeah, at some point they're going to have to choose between these guys. And then it's like they're going to get more prospects back for Jose Ramirez eventually. So it's like you can't just have your 40-man roster be minor league guys with no experience. Like at some point you have to move some of these guys. Like it's going to be interesting to see how kind of the beginning of this year plays out, because I don't know how long. Then what happens when injuries start to happen? Then it's like you got guys on the 40-man who aren't even ready to come up yet. Like if there's an injury at first base, John Kenzie Noel's not coming up to the majors right away.
Right.
And it's like these guys who aren't ready are going to be taking up these spots. So that's why I thought they'd have to make a move. They'd have to make some trades, because the roster as currently constructed just doesn't make sense. It's not feasible to head into the season with. But they're going to try to beat all the odds and make it work. Looks like.
I guess so. We'll see how that works out. We're just a couple weeks away, and
then you got the bullpen.
Yeah,
you know, with Karen Check out now, Cody Morris, which sucks. You know, he had another injury. Speaking of the kids, that's just brutal, because
that was a big blow.
Those injury concerns just continue to follow him, and that's a shame. But it's like you got Class A Nick Sandlin, who's an injury risk. Anthony Gose, Brian Shaw, Trevor Stephan, and like Sam Henches, like just by default, like him and Logan Allen have not been good. And that's not surprising, because they haven't been consistently good at all. So it's like, again, what are you doing in the bullpen? That's why I brought up, Yniel De Los Santos. Like, I know he's a non-roster guy, but he's looked really good. He's got a great arm.
Yeah, he does. And with the work they've done with young pitchers, I know he's got a good fastball and a developing slider. You think that maybe it gives you hope that maybe they can fix him, because he does have a lot of potential. Just hasn't worked out so far for him.
Nick Mikolajczyk as well. He could be a guy to watch.
Yeah, he's probably the top bullpen arm in the minor leagues right now. So, yeah, we could see him sooner rather than later as well. All right. Any final thoughts before we wrap this up?
Just no more Zemcato, please.
Yes, please.
I will say that. I will put that in my prayers.
And I'm like you. I'm sick to my stomach thinking about them being in the opening day lineup, because you just know it's going to happen at this point, unfortunately.
Can't even.
All right. Well, I appreciate you taking the time on a Sunday and coming on with me. I know we've had to move things around a little bit this week, but appreciate it.
No problem. Always a pleasure.
And you can catch Mel along with Max Goldstein every Monday on the Guardians of the CLE podcast. So make sure you look forward to their episode tomorrow. And make sure you're following us on Twitter at Believeland Media. And I'll subscribe to Apple, Spotify, Google, wherever you listen to your podcasts. And, of course, our YouTube channel for all the video podcasts. So everybody, have a good week, and we will talk to you next week.
Thank you.